The observation deck of the Tal Zara was supposed to be neutral ground, keyword being supposed. But when you cram 40 species into one diplomatic vessel, each with their own ideas about honor, strength, and personal space, neutrality becomes more of a polite fiction than an actual rule. I was there, of course. I'm always there when things get interesting. Name's Carveth. Third Eye Reconnaissance for the Coalition's Cultural Documentation Division, which is a fancy way of saying I watch aliens do stupid things and write reports about it. And let me tell you, what I witnessed that rotation, that was a report I actually enjoyed writing. The human delegation had been aboard for 6 cycles. 6 cycles of them being underestimated, dismissed, and generally treated like the galactic equivalent of house pets. Their species had just been granted provisional membership, which meant most of the established powers saw them as adorable little upstarts who'd probably blow themselves up within a generation or two. Standard prejudice, really. We've all been there. The human team consisted of 5 individuals. Ambassador Lucia Okonkwo, a woman whose patience I'd watched thin like ice over warm water. Dr. Henrik Voss, their xenobiologist who had the unfortunate habit of being correct about everything. Sergeant Priya Malhotra, their security attaché, who smiled too much for someone carrying that many weapons. Engineer Dmitry Volkov, who'd already redesigned 3 of our supposedly perfect systems, and the one everyone focused on, Captain Yuki Tanaka. Captain Tanaka was small. I don't mean that as an insult, I mean it as an observable fact. She stood perhaps 1.6 meters tall, massed maybe 60 kilograms, soaking wet, and had this way of moving that reminded me of water, fluid, unhurried, economical, the kind of movement that doesn't waste a single gesture. The Krell didn't see it that way. Warlord Grath'nor, and yes, they actually use Warlord as a title, because subtlety died on their homeworld sometime before they discovered fire, had been antagonizing the human delegation since they'd arrived. He was your typical Krell specimen, 2.8 meters of scales, muscle, and overcompensating aggression, 4 arms, each capable of crushing durasteel, a tail that had supposedly killed 6 opponents in arena combat, and an ego that could be seen from orbit. He'd focused on Tanaka from day one. The soft-skinned female, he'd say, loudly, whenever she entered a room. Does your species send children to negotiate for them? Or perhaps breeding stock? The other Krell would rumble with laughter, this wet, gurgling sound that their vocal structure produces. Charming, really. Tanaka never responded. Just smiled. This small, polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and went about her business. This drove Grath'nor insane. You see, Krell culture operates on a pretty simple algorithm. Challenge, response, dominance, submission. When someone insults you, you either fight or you acknowledge your inferior position. Silence? Smiling? That doesn't compute. It's like trying to run combat software on agricultural hardware. Nothing works right, and eventually something breaks. By the 6th cycle, Grath'nor was obsessed. I'd watched him steer conversations toward the humans, just to get a reaction. I'd seen him accidentally block doorways when Tanaka approached, forcing her to ask permission to pass. I'd observed him make increasingly explicit comments about human fragility, human weakness, human irrelevance. And through it all, Tanaka just smiled. Ambassador Okonkwo looked ready to start a war. Dr. Voss kept detailed notes with the air of a scientist watching a particularly aggressive bacterium. Sergeant Malhotra's smile had developed an edge that suggested she knew 47 ways to kill someone with a spoon and was mentally rehearsing all of them. Volkov started taking different routes to avoid the Krell entirely. But Tanaka? She smiled, nodded politely, and went about her day. Until the observation deck incident. The observation deck was one of the few spaces on the Tal Zara where different species could interact informally. Stunning views of whatever stellar phenomenon were passing. Decent ventilation for methane breathers and oxygen breathers alike, and usually enough space that everyone can maintain their cultural comfort distances. That particular cycle, maybe 20 individuals from various delegations were present. I was reviewing some footage in the corner. Yes, we record everything. How else would we document these encounters? When the humans arrived, just Tanaka and Voss this time. The doctor wanted to observe the nebula we were skirting for some research project, and Tanaka had tagged along. Professional courtesy. protection detail. Whatever. Humans tend to travel in groups when possible. They'd been there maybe 10 standard minutes when Grath'nor arrived, with his entire retinue. All 7 of them. Each one a mountain of scales and barely restrained violence. The temperature in the room, and I mean this metaphorically, though several species did adjust their thermal regulators, dropped immediately. Conversation stopped. The Seseth delegation very carefully moved to the far side of the deck. The Vorlon ambassador suddenly remembered an urgent appointment elsewhere. Smart beings, the Vorlans. Grath'nor made what I can only describe as a production out of entering the space. Chest expanded, all 4 arms spread to emphasize his size, tail swishing with what the Krell consider a dominance display. His entourage fanned out behind him, cutting off the obvious exits. I activated my backup recording devices. Call it professional instinct. The soft-skinned female, Grath'nor announced, his voice carrying easily across the observation deck. Still decorating spaces meant for warriors and diplomats, I see. Tell me, little creature, has your species confused military rank with, what is the human term, secretarial duties? His retinue rumbled their approval. One of them, Kresh, I think, added his own commentary about human females being suitable only for comfort roles. The exact phrasing doesn't translate well, but trust me, it was crude. Dr. Voss stiffened. His hand moved very slightly toward the communication device at his belt. Probably thinking about calling Sergeant Malhotra, maybe getting security involved before this escalated further. Tanaka put her hand on his arm. Gentle, restraining. Still smiling. Warlord Grath'nor, she said, her voice perfectly calm, perfectly polite. I hope your cycle has been productive. Perfect deflection. Acknowledge the speaker. Maintain courtesy. Give him nothing to escalate with. I'd seen diplomats train for years to achieve that level of control. Grath'nor apparently interpreted this as weakness. He moved closer and closer, for a Krell means looming. He positioned himself directly in front of Tanaka, forcing her to crane her neck to maintain eye contact. Classic intimidation, the kind that works on maybe 70% of spacefaring species. Productive, he rumbled. Yes, little soft skin. I have been productive. I have negotiated 3 trade agreements, settled 2 territorial disputes, and established dominance protocols with 4 delegations. And you, have you been smiling productively? The other Krell found this hilarious. Tanaka's expression didn't change. I'm pleased your cycle has been successful, Warlord. Successful, Grath'nor repeated, tasting the word. Do you know what would make it more successful, little female? Here it comes, I remember thinking. 6 cycles of build-up, and we're finally hitting the confrontation point. I checked my recording angle, made sure I was capturing everything. What would that be, Warlord? Tanaka asked, still impossibly calm. Grath'nor leaned down, bringing his massive head level with hers. His breath, which I can confirm smells like rotting fish and industrial solvent, washed over her face. If you acknowledged your proper place, if you admitted that your species is weak, that you are weak, that your presence here is, he paused, searching for the right word, tolerated. Nothing more. The observation deck had gone absolutely silent. Even the background hum of the ship's systems seemed muted. Dr. Voss looked pale. Well, paler. Humans are already distressingly light-colored. His hand was now definitely on his communicator. Tanaka just looked at Grath'nor. Really looked at him, with these dark, dark eyes that seemed to be calculating something. Running numbers. Assessing variables. I see, she said softly. Then, even softer. Is that truly what you want, Warlord? Acknowledgement? Grath'nor's chest swelled with triumph. Finally, the soft skin understands. Yes, little female. Acknowledge your weakness. Acknowledge that I challenge you, Tanaka said. The silence somehow got more silent. I think several species stopped breathing. Grath'nor blinked. All 3 sets of eyelids cycling in sequence, which is Krell for did I just hear what I think I heard? You. What? I challenge you, Tanaka repeated, her voice now carrying across the observation deck with perfect clarity. Personal combat. Traditional Krell rules, if you prefer. Right to refuse, right to set terms. Isn't that how your culture handles disputes of honor? Oh, this was beautiful. This was glorious. Because see, The thing about Krell challenge protocols is that they're sacred, absolutely sacred. Refusing a legitimately issued challenge is grounds for complete social disgrace. Grath'nor could no more back down from this than he could breathe vacuum. But accepting it meant fighting someone a fraction of his size, from a species everyone considered weak. If he won when he won, in his mind, it would prove nothing. Beating up someone small isn't honorable, it's just bullying with witnesses. If he lost, well, that was unthinkable, wasn't it? Grath'nor's expression cycled through confusion, anger, calculation, and finally settled on contemptuous amusement. You challenge me? Little soft-skinned female. Do you understand what you're— I understand perfectly, Tanaka interrupted, and there was something in her voice now, something sharp. I challenge you to personal combat, under traditional Krell rules. You may set the terms, weapons, victory conditions, whatever you consider appropriate. Do you accept? The other Krell were muttering among themselves now, clearly uncertain. This wasn't following the script. Humans weren't supposed to understand challenge protocols, much less use them. Grath'nor looked around at his retinue, at the watching aliens, at the recording devices he had to know were capturing every word. His reputation was on the line, 6 cycles of harassment, and now the victim was calling him out in the most public way possible. He could have been smart, could have set reasonable terms, maybe a contest of strength or endurance where his natural advantages would guarantee victory while maintaining some semblance of honor. Instead, he let his ego make the decision. No weapons, he declared. Unarmed combat. Victory by submission or unconsciousness. Here, now in front of these witnesses, and when I am done with you, little female, your species will learn the price of— Accepted, Tanaka said. Dr. Voss, please clear the center of the deck and notify the ship's medical bay. They'll want to be on standby. Grath'nor laughed. This booming, contemptuous sound. Concerned for yourself, soft skin? Wise but futile. Medical assistance will not for me, Tanaka said, and started stretching. I've witnessed a lot of fights in my career. Arena matches, honor duels, drunken brawls in station cantinas where the gravity was set wrong and nobody could land a proper punch. But I have never seen a crowd clear space as fast as they did for that observation deck fight. Dr. Voss was already on his communicator. Not calling security, I noticed, but medical. Interesting choice. The various alien delegations pressed themselves against the walls, giving the combatants a rough circle maybe 10 meters in diameter. Perfect view for everyone. Perfect recording angles for me. Grath'nor was still laughing as he moved to the center, rolling all 4 shoulders in sequence, his tail lashing with anticipation. His retinue was chanting something in Krell battle cant. Roughly translates to crush the weak, honor the strong, though it sounds more impressive when you're rumbling it with a 3-chambered lung system. Tanaka finished her stretches, and I mean really finished them, like she was preparing for a training session, not a fight to unconsciousness with someone who outmassed her by a factor of 4. She rolled her neck, shook out her hands, and walked to the center of the cleared space with that same water-smooth economy of movement. They stood facing each other. The size difference was almost comical. Grath'nor looming like a mountain range, Tanaka barely coming up to the bottom of his chest. She had to tilt her head back just to make eye contact. Last chance, soft skin, Grath'nor said, and I think part of him actually meant it. Submit now, acknowledge your weakness, and I will make this less painful. Tanaka smiled. That same small, polite smile she'd been wearing for 6 cycles. I appreciate the offer, Warlord, but I think we're past that point, don't you? So be it. Grath'nor settled into what I recognized as a Krell combat stance, weight distributed across all 4 limbs for stability, tail coiled for striking, primary arms forward. When you wake up in medical, remember, you chose this. I'll remember, Tanaka said. Then she did something that made every being in that observation deck lean forward with sudden, intense interest. She didn't take a stance, didn't raise her hands into guards, didn't shift her weight, didn't do anything that looked like preparation for combat, just stood there, relaxed, almost casual. One of the Krell in the retinue, Kresh again, started to say something, probably about human ignorance or stupidity, but Grath'nor silenced him with a gesture. The warlord's expression had shifted slightly, not quite confusion, not quite concern, but something between them, like he was looking at a puzzle that wasn't solving correctly. "Defend yourself," he growled. "I am," Tanaka replied. That did it. Grath'nor's patience, never his strong suit, snapped completely. He lunged forward with his primary right arm, claws extended, going for what looked like a grab-and-throw maneuver. Simple, brutal, effective. The kind of opening move that had worked for him in probably 100 fights. Here's what I saw. A massive scaled arm moving fast. Faster than something that size should move. Sweeping toward Tanaka's torso. Here's what happened. Tanaka wasn't there. I'm serious. One moment she was directly in front of Grath'nor. The next she'd shifted, maybe 20 centimeters to the left, maybe less, and his claws sliced through empty air where her body had been a fraction of a second earlier, and she'd moved so minimally. Not a dodge, not a jump, just not being in the space his attack occupied. Like she'd known exactly where his hand would be, and had simply elected to be elsewhere. Grath'nor stumbled slightly. Physics being what they are, missing a grab when you've committed that much mass creates momentum issues, and Tanaka was already moving, not attacking, just repositioning. She slipped to his left side, still maddeningly close but somehow just outside his optimal striking range. "Interesting opening," she said, conversationally. Very direct. The Krell retinue had stopped chanting. Several of them were leaning forward now, watching with what I can only describe as professional interest. Grath'nor snarled and spun, tail whipping around in a strike that would have shattered bone if it connected. Krell tails are essentially clubs with scales, solid muscle, armored ridge, devastating impact force. Tanaka dropped. Not a crouch, not a duck. She just collapsed her stance, dropped maybe 40 centimeters in height, and the tail whistled over her head with centimeters to spare. Before Grath'nor could recover, before he could even process what had happened, she was up again. Different position, different angle, still just outside his reach. Good power on that, she observed. Must have broken a lot of things with that tail. Now Grath'nor was angry. I could see it in the color shift of his scales, deep red creeping up from his bass tones. He attacked in earnest now, four arms moving in coordinated strikes, tail lashing, massive feet stomping to cut off escape routes. It was actually beautiful in its way, pure aggression channeled through trained technique, and Tanaka just flowed. I'm not exaggerating. She moved like water, like smoke, like something that wasn't quite solid. Every strike missed by margins so small they seemed impossible. A claw swipe passed centimeters from her face. She'd angled her head just enough. A grab came at her shoulder. She'd already turned, the hand closing on empty air. The tail came around again. She stepped into its arc, inside the impact zone where it had no force. And she was smiling the whole time. Not mocking, not cruel, just calm. Professionally calm, like this was exactly what she'd expected. Dr. Voss was watching with the expression of someone whose scientific hypotheses are being confirmed in real time. The other delegations were silent, transfixed. Even the Krell retinue had stopped rumbling their approval. They were watching with the focused intensity of warriors who recognize something they don't quite understand. Grath'nor was breathing hard now. Not exhausted. Krell endurance is impressive, but frustrated, confused, and increasingly desperate. He'd thrown maybe 30 strikes, each one capable of ending the fight, and he hadn't landed a single one. "Stand still," he roared, and there was something almost plaintive in his voice. "Fight me." "I am fighting you," Tanaka said, and for the first time she moved toward him. It was so fast I almost missed it. Grath'nor threw another punch. Primary left this time, telegraphed by shoulder movement. Tanaka didn't dodge. Instead, she stepped forward and to the side, into his guard, and did something with her hands that I still don't fully understand even after watching the recording 70 times. She touched his arm. That's all it looked like. Just touched it. Barely any force. Right at the elbow joint. Grath'nor's entire arm went limp. He stared at it. We all stared at it. A limb that could bend durasteel was just hanging there. Nerveless, unresponsive. "That's the brachial plexus," Tanaka said, her voice still conversational, still polite. "Well, your equivalent. Humans figured out pressure points a few thousand years ago. Turns out most bilateral life forms have them." Dr. Voss's research was very helpful on Krell neural architecture. Thank you for being so forthcoming with your medical data during the cultural exchange. She'd moved away again before Grath'nor could process what she'd said. He tried to swing with his other 3 arms, but coordination was failing him now. You train to fight with 4 limbs, and when one suddenly stops working, it throws off everything. Tanaka circled him like a moon orbiting a planet, just outside his increasingly clumsy attempts to grab her. You asked me to acknowledge weakness, she said. Let me tell you about weakness, Warlord. Weakness isn't size, isn't mass, isn't even strength. She darted in again. Another touch, this time to his secondary right arm. Same result. Another limb went dead. Weakness, she continued, and now there was something sharp in her voice, something that had been hidden under 6 cycles of smiling politeness, is assuming you're dominant because you're bigger. It's mistaking aggression for ability. It's thinking that because someone doesn't respond to provocation, they can't respond. Grath'nor was backing up now, actually backing away from someone a quarter his size. His tail came around again, more defensive than offensive, and Tanaka simply stepped over it like it was an inconvenience. She was inside his guard again, and this time her hand moved faster, a strike, not a touch, right to his exposed throat. Not hard. Didn't even leave a mark. But Grath'nor made a sound I'd never heard a Krell make before, a kind of strangled wheeze, and dropped to his knees. The observation deck was absolutely silent. Tanaka circled around to face him, and her expression had finally changed. No more polite smile, just tired, disappointed, maybe. You spent 6 cycles trying to humiliate me, she said quietly. 6 cycles of insults, intimidation, and harassment. Not because I'd done anything to you, not because of any legitimate grievance, but because you decided I was weak, and weak things exist for you to dominate. Yes? Grath'nor tried to speak, but his throat wasn't cooperating. He just glared at her with those reptilian eyes. Rage and confusion and something that might have been fear mixing together. The funny thing is, Tanaka continued, you were right about one thing. I am weaker than you. Physically, I mean, you could absolutely tear me apart if you got your hands on me. Superior strength, superior endurance, natural weapons I don't have. By every objective measure, you should dominate me in combat. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was colder. But strength without skill is just mass. Power without discipline is just thrashing, and size without strategy is just a bigger target. She moved one last time, almost too fast to follow. Her hand struck 3 times. Shoulder, hip, knee. Precise, economical. Exactly as hard as necessary. Grath'nor collapsed. Fully collapsed. All 2.8 meters and 400 kilograms of him, hitting the deck with a sound like a cargo container dropping. He was still conscious, eyes open, breathing, aware, but nothing was moving. Everything below his neck had simply stopped responding. Tanaka stood over him, breathing steady, not even sweating. That's a complete neural shutdown, she said, her voice back to that professional calm. Temporary. You'll recover in about 20 minutes. Might want to visit medical anyway. Get checked out. Sometimes there's residual tingling. She looked up at the Krell retinue, who were staring at their fallen warlord with expressions that ranged from shock to what might have been respect. Anyone else want to discuss human weakness? My schedule's pretty open. Nobody moved. Excellent. Tanaka turned to Dr. Voss. Medical should be here soon. Make sure they understand it's neural shock, not cardiac arrest. The symptoms look similar in Krell physiology. Already noted in my report, Voss said. And was he trying not to smile? Yes. Yes, he was. Ambassador Okonkwo's voice came through the ship's communication system. Captain Tanaka, please report to the diplomatic wing when you're finished with whatever you're doing. Understood, Ambassador. Tanaka looked around the observation deck, making eye contact with several of the watching aliens. I apologize for the disruption. Please continue enjoying the nebula. It really is beautiful. And then she just walked away. Calm, composed, like she'd just finished a mild workout instead of systematically dismantling a warlord twice her size in front of 40 witnesses. The medical team arrived maybe 2 minutes later, and they were very professional about the whole thing. Got Grath'nor on a stretcher, took 4 of them to lift him, and hauled him off to the medical bay. His retinue followed in silence, not even rumbling among themselves. Dr. Voss stayed behind, ostensibly to finish his nebula observations. Really, I think he just wanted to be available for questions. I approached him, professional curiosity, you understand. Doctor, I have to ask, did you know Captain Tanaka could do that? He looked at me with those pale human eyes and smiled. Let me tell you something about humans, Carveth. We're not the strongest species, not the fastest, not the toughest, not the most naturally armed, but we've spent our entire evolutionary history as ambush predators and endurance hunters on a planet where everything was trying to kill us. And, I prompted. And we got very, very good at finding weaknesses, at using minimal force for maximum effect, at turning an opponent's strengths into vulnerabilities. He gestured toward where Tanaka had disappeared. Captain Tanaka holds master certifications in 6 different martial arts. She spent 20 years studying how to defeat opponents bigger and stronger than herself. That's her specialty. 20 years, I repeated. Your species lives maybe 80 years on average, yes? She's spent a quarter of her lifespan learning to fight? Learning to win, Voss corrected. There's a difference. Fighting is about conflict. Winning is about ending conflict on your terms. He turned back to the nebula observation window. Warlord Grath'nor spent 6 cycles trying to prove humans are weak. Captain Tanaka spent 6 cycles letting him believe it. Predators are patient like that. I thought about this, about 6 cycles of calculated patience, about a smile that never changed while insults rolled off like water, about the absolute control required to endure harassment, to let it build, to wait for exactly the right moment to respond. That's terrifying, actually, I said. Yes, Dr. Voss agreed cheerfully. Yes, it is. Word spread through the ship within the hour, of course. By the next cycle, my footage, was being shared across every delegation. The Krell contingent became notably quieter in common areas. Several other species that had been, let's say, dismissive of the human delegation, suddenly found reasons to be more respectful. Grath'nor recovered fully, for what it's worth. Spent 2 days in medical, another 3 in his quarters. When he finally emerged, he went straight to the human delegation's quarters and requested a formal meeting with Captain Tanaka. I wasn't there for that conversation. Some things happen behind closed doors. But I heard later that he'd offered a traditional Krell apology, which involves acknowledging superior combat skill and requesting permission to learn from it. Tanaka accepted. Started teaching him and several other interested Krell basic principles of leverage, momentum, and nerve strikes. Turned it into a cultural exchange thing, which Ambassador Okonkwo was apparently delighted about. I finished my report. Titled it, Reassessment of Human Combat Capabilities, a Case Study. It's required reading now for any coalition personnel assigned to work with human delegations. The key finding? Never assume weakness. Never mistake politeness for inability. And definitely never underestimate someone just because they're smaller than you. Because sometimes, often, in humanity's case, the most dangerous thing in the room is the one that's been smiling the whole time.